Hi friends, today I am sharing with you a little technique I actually haven't used for a little while, although because I'm painting these little lily of the valleys, which by the way, I don't see them too often around here. I think it's a little bit too hot here. They're very pretty though. They're real tiny and I like them. What I wanted to show you today is painting a background. It's a very easy way. It's wet in wet, and I quite like this technique. So let's go ahead and bring out, I'm using my 8-round Princeton, and you can use whichever Princeton round you would like. I think the round is going to work the best for here. I've got my 2 containers of water, my paper towel, and today, because these little flowers are white, I'm mostly going to be using a little purple in the background, maybe a little blue, and of course green for these stems and leaves. So let's start out. I'm going to, let's just do a little swatch here and get an idea and feel for the colors that we're using. So this is the purple I'm using, which is violet purple. This is from Winsor Newton. And I'm going to also use, I think, this turquoise color from Winsor Newton. I think this is a really beautiful color with the purple. They're in the same family. Assuming that violet is made from blue and red. So I think that'll go well with that. And I'm going to use that in the background. The little flowers, I have seen purple ones, although I'm going to make mine for the most part white with some hints of the blue and purple in them. And then, of course, our green, I typically am using my olive and my sap green. So we've got that there. Let's just get some of that. I need to refill my pans. I'm running a little bit low. There we go. I know these look the same, but actually the olive green is just a tad bit darker, and I like mixing them together. So I think for the most part, this is going to be my color palette. I'm going to keep it fairly simple since these little lilies of the valley are white. What I really wanted to show you was this technique to, if you wanted to add a background, you can do this. So what we're going to start with is a wet brush. Now, again, I always advise don't put puddles down. We just want that beautiful shine. I'm going to go ahead and go in and start wetting some of the area. I'm just going around these little flowers. Don't worry too much about the stems because we can go over the light wash with a darker color. So I'm just laying down some water here, being a little bit careful to go around those little flowers, just like that. I'm going to work into this area while it's wet, and let's go in with some of our blue, and I'm using quite a watered down light version of that blue. Okay, and I'm just dabbing in here and there like this, where this water is. All right, just like that. Okay, now I can go in with just water and kind of spread that around my flowers. We want this very washy background. And the longer you leave it here, the more it's going to spread. Now I'm going to add in a tiny bit of that purple, very light, because this violet purple can be quite intense. So we want that to be a light value. And just tap in here and there. Okay, so you've got this damp brush and you're just tapping in. Now, when you get to the edge of where your water line is, go in with clear water and just touch in and spread that like this. Spreading more of that water around. I'm going around my leaf here. Okay, and look at this beautiful wash we get in the background, this bleeding and blending. That's what we want for our background. So let me add in a little bit more here, just going around my leaf, using both the purple and our turquoise blue. You want it to be very washy so it looks like a background. So make sure you're using a very damp brush, but not creating puddles here. So I just continue to go around these flowers with my wet brush, just creating a shine, not puddles. That's how we know we have enough water. And then I'm going in with some water on my brush, and I go back into that turquoise and dot in, and we're going to now let it spread. Like that. Going around these little edges of the flowers. And then going around to add the water, I do more of a technique of pushing into the line there where I stopped with my paint. So I'm pushing in with the water, okay? And we're not gonna fill this entire page with this wash. We're just gonna kind of loosely go around. So I'm going into my purple and continuing to go in. Don't worry about going over these stems because we'll go over that with green. Since this is so light, we shouldn't have a problem there. You can define some of these little flower pieces like so. All right. Now I'm going to go in here at the bottom of the leaf. Again, no puddles. You're just moving that water around to create a beautiful sheen. Like that. So my paper's just shiny. Then I go in, I rinse my brush, I scrape it a bit. If you have any drips on your brush, just wipe those off. And I go back into my turquoise. Start dabbing in here. I'm adding a little bit more water because I don't want it to be too dark, and just really letting the water create this beautiful wash. Okay, I get rid of any hard lines. Now I'll go in with some of that purple, making it very light value, meaning more water than paint. Just kind of dabbing in here and there, really encouraging this to spread. There we go. Now, I've got a clean brush here that's damp, and I might just go into the edges of that. You want a very organic feel here, so you don't want any hard lines. You go in like this, just tapping in. Go in with my purple, like this. And then give it a minute. It will spread more and more. When you let watercolors sit, they always change a bit, okay? So there we go. I'm going to continue up around the side of this leaf, and I'm turning my paper so I don't put my hand in front. So just wetting my brush and creating a shine. We don't want those puddles. And now I'm back to where I started here. Going into a little bit more paint, very light value, like that. Now see how this looks spotty, but once it sits, it really blends. So always let your watercolors sit. They will change their look. Like this. Okay. So there we go. We have this beautiful background. Now, you can go in with just a damp brush to all the edges, or if you feel like you want to change the kind of the shape, you can go around and bring it up towards the top. Something like this. Okay. Just going in with that damp brush, softening those lines. Okay, I think we're good here. Now, normally I would take a dryer, a good old hair dryer, and I would go in and kind of dry this. I don't want you to hear all that noise. So I'm going to try to go into these little white flowers, and even though they're white, they are going to have a little bit of very subtle hues of maybe greens. I've seen these in some purples, and that's what we want to add in, but very lightly. So how I'm going to do that, now make sure you're not working right next to a wet area, because otherwise it'll just bleed into each other. So I know this one, the area around it's pretty dry, so I'm going to wet it a tiny bit. Again, I'm not creating any puddles, just enough water to create a little shine. And now I'm going to go in with some very, very light value of green, which is watered down. A darker value would be more paint than water. And I'm just going to touch in here and just give it some little touches of that color and let that spread. Now this is pretty dry, so I'm going to go in and wet these as well. Just a little bit, not too much. If you've got some of that green paint on your brush in the water, just rinse it off really good. And now I'm going to touch in again with a tiny bit of that paint. Just the slightest amount of green. Isn't that pretty? So it gives you that hint of color, but yet you can tell these are more white. Now, once this dries, we're going to go in with the tip of our brush, and we're going to create these stems over the wash. I want to make sure the background wash is very dry first. Otherwise, we're going to get those blobs you all write to me about, and a lot of bleeding. And we want the stems to be somewhat clearly defined. So let's keep working on these little cute little lilies of the valley. I'm just barely wetting them, creating that shine. Now, if you get any puddle, just pick it up with your brush and dab your brush on your paper towel. I just want a shine. I don't want any type of little puddle area. There we go. And then I go into my very light value and just start at the top where it joins at the stem and just let it come down into the flower. For the most part, the flower is white. I'm moving on to this one now. And I'll tell you, when you're painting light colored flowers or white flowers, be very careful about changing your water, because any color that is in the water is going to transfer to your brush and to whatever color you're using. So here, because this is such a light value, if my water's dirty at all, it's going to show up in my little white flowers. So I'm going in here, just with that water, creating that shine, and then into my very, very pale version light value, and just tapping in at the top here and letting it kind of draw down and blend. Now let's go in here, since this is somewhat dry, I'm hoping, and I'm going to pick up a darker value of that green. All right, so see the difference there? This has more pigment in it and less water. And I'm going to use the tip of my brush, holding my brush more upright, very, very light pressure, and I'm just going to create this little stem here. Just like that, and that's what I wanted. I wanted that little burst. Now I didn't get it as much with that one because that one was drier. This is what I wanted. I think that is beautiful. Tip of my brush, very, very, very light pressure. And going in. Okay? So this is how we're going to create all of these. Now the leaves, we will do that as well. Let's do a leaf here, and that'll give this a chance to dry a little bit more. But look at how pretty those little white flowers are. Yet they have that tint of green. So let's go in here, and I think these I will just go ahead with my color, kind of a medium value. And I'm going to go in here. Point, press, like this. Point, press, just like that. And curl up here. So just pressing down with my brush, just like that. Now what I'll do is once this dries a bit, I might go in with a darker glaze for the under bottom part, because this leaf is kind of curling. So the top is going to have a little bit more of a lighter value. We could actually even go in here while this is wet and add in a tiny bit of a darker value of that paint and just tap in and let it spread. So I'm just tapping in towards the underside of that leaf. Now, if I want to encourage that to spread a little bit, we can wet our brush, get all the paint off, and scrape it on the side of our water bowl. Make sure there's not too much water and go in. But keep in mind, let it sit for a minute, because a lot of times watercolors will blend on their own. Now I want this to spread a little bit, so I'm just pulling a tiny bit so I can encourage it. Okay, I'm going to go in with just a tiny bit more here. Just dabbing in and letting that wet on wet technique work here for me. Might add in some down here at the base, like that. Just barely using the tip of my brush, okay? And then there's this little tiny flip at the bottom. I'm just going to darken that a tiny bit. like so. Okay, look at how beautiful that is. Going in and letting that wet on wet really do the work for you. So I'm going to leave that be. Let's go back to our little lilies of the valley, because I think the background's getting pretty dry. And I'm going to just dampen another one, making sure you have no tiny puddle of water. If you do, kind of pick it up and tap off. You just want it to shine. You just want it to be damp. And then I'm going into my paint, creating that lighter value. And I'm going to use the tip of my brush, very light pressure, holding the brush up and down, and draw this little stem, the lightest pressure. This is why it's so important to really protect the integrity of your tips too, by not setting them down and leaving them in your waters with the tip down, by not going into your paint too much with a scrubbing with the tip. You want to keep this beautiful little tip going up and down. Now when I touch into that water, it's going to blend and give us this effect, which is so beautiful. Let's go ahead and do these last two little lilies of the valley. I get them damp like that. I'm just picking up some of the water because I don't want that puddle. There we go. And I'm now going to draw the little stems. Like that. Okay, if you feel like you might have too much on your brush, you can always tap it like that. And then very light pressure. There you go, and you get that tiny little burst. Like that. Isn't that beautiful? Let's do our last one here. Actually, why don't we go ahead and draw this long stem here? And I'm going to use a little bit darker value for that so you can see it. So I'm picking up my green. As you can see, it's a darker value, but it's not too wet. If you feel it's wet, just dab it off on your paper towel. And with a very fine point and holding my brush lightly, very, very little pressure, I'm going to point my brush in the direction I want to go and just lightly draw this little stem like that. Okay, so there you go. You can even add a little to these. I love that it just did that. It still has that tiny bit of water, so it spreads. You don't want them all to be the exact same value. There we go. Okay, I like that. We have one more little flower here. I'm washing my brush, keeping it just damp. And then let's wet this last little lily of the valley. No standing water in there, just a shine. And then we'll go in with our green just on the tip. And when you tap in, because of the water, it's going to spread. There you go. Now really we could add in more here, more little flowers. I think you get kind of this concept that I'm sharing with you, Let's go ahead and paint this last leaf. I noticed for such tiny little flowers, they actually have quite large leaves, which I thought was interesting. Starting with the tip of my brush. Now, because this is quite a large leaf, you somewhat need a lot of paint and water, because by the time I get to the middle, my brush is gonna start drying out, which is fine. We'll go over it. Point, press into your brush, and start pulling up to that point again, just like that. Okay, and look at how naturally I got this line from the edge of my brush. I like that a lot. I'm going to go in with just a damp brush and point press into my brush. There we go. I'm quite liking that. I like the different values. I like how my brush just happened to have some green paint on it and it made this line. What I might do here is, I think I'm going to add a little darker green near the top. So while it's wet, I pick up some paint and I'm going to tap in like this. Okay. Rinse my brush, scrape it, tap it off, and now just encourage this to spread, just like that. A little bit how we did under here. I think that's really pretty. Okay. So there we go. This is a simple little lily of the valley. Simple meaning we haven't got a lot of detail. Practice this wet in wet and be very, very careful so you don't get those blobs. To not put too much water, okay? In the wash, and anytime you're painting, I never put water on my paintings that is a puddle. It just, you have so little control and it tends to just kind of make a big mess. So there you have it. Now I might end up going in and creating a few little lines, or maybe darkening in here a tiny bit. Maybe not. Let's see what happens if we do. It could really create some interest. So because this is no longer wet, we're not getting that spread. To encourage that spread, because I don't like those hard lines, I rinse my brush, tap it off so it's just damp, and then I just go in and do that pushing and pulling, just barely touching the edge of that line to soften it, like that. Okay? There we go. And I quite like that. You could add in some down here if you like. And just taking my darker paint and creating a little line like so. There we go. And I think we're pretty well done here. I like this. Now you can do your two leaves like this. I kind of did a twist here thing, which is a little bit more difficult, and I want to do a tutorial on drawing those. So that was a really hard concept for my mind to understand how that does that. So I'd like to create a tutorial that may be coming. I'm just going in a little bit more with that dark. There we go. And just lining the edge there. Now, because it's wet, it's blending quite nicely. And I really like these different values. It's not one solid green color. I hope you play with this and practice these washes. You can do that also just on a piece of paper. You can practice creating these washes. If you go back to my tutorial on washes, this is where it can come in really handy. And getting used to creating that shine and then dabbing in some color and letting it blend. It can create a really beautiful background like this. I hope you all try this, and I will list my supplies in the description below. I'm using again that 8 round, and actually this is student grade paper. These are those Artisto pads, and give it a try and let me know how you do. All right, happy painting, everybody. Thanks for being here.